At first glance, Nola's life seemed perfect. Moving to the bustling city with her husband, Hamisi, was supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful journey, a chance to build a life together, filled with love and dreams. Hamisi was her everything, her confidant, the one who promised her security in an uncertain world. But beneath the surface, small cracks began to appear. Late nights, strange excuses, and a growing distance in Hamisi's eyes left Nola wondering what went wrong. Her heart told her something was off, yet she pushed aside her doubts, convincing herself it was just city stress. But one evening, she caught a glimpse of him with another woman, and everything she thought she knew about her marriage came crashing down. What was Hamisi hiding? And why was the man she loved slipping away, leaving her more alone than ever? Nola would soon discover a truth so painful, it would change her life forever. Nola had always been a woman full of dreams and a fierce determination to make a better life for herself. Growing up in a small village, she was known for her kindness, resilience, and her desire to find happiness beyond the confines of her hometown. When she married Hamisi, a charming and ambitious man, it felt like the beginning of that long-awaited dream. Hamisi promised her the world, a life of shared ambitions and love, and she believed every word he said. Their move to the city was meant to be a new chapter for them both. Hamisi had found a good job and was eager to make a name for himself, while Nola looked forward to supporting him and exploring all that city life had to offer. Their small apartment was modest, but she made it feel like a home with touches of warmth and care, a vase of fresh flowers, carefully chosen decorations, and traditional fabrics from home that reminded her of her roots. Every day, she would prepare meals for Hamisi, waiting eagerly for him to come home and share stories about their day. At first, the city seemed magical, alive with opportunities and excitement. But soon, Nola began to notice subtle changes in Hamisi. He grew quieter and more distracted, often checking his phone and brushing off her attempts at conversation. Some nights, he would come home late without warning, and when Nola asked him why, he'd give vague responses about work pressure or unexpected meetings. Nola brushed it off initially, convincing herself it was the stress of the city life they were both adjusting to. She wanted to be a supportive wife, someone he could rely on. But even as she tried to ignore the signs, a sense of unease started creeping in. She began spending evenings alone, her gaze fixed on the clock, counting the minutes as she waited for him to return. Her neighbors noticed her loneliness, and a few times, one would invite her over for tea or offer a sympathetic smile. They sensed her isolation, but Nola kept her worries private, telling herself that every couple goes through challenges. The bustling city lights outside their window once felt like stars of hope. Now, they seemed distant and cold, mirroring the growing distance in her marriage. One evening, as Nola was tidying up, she stumbled upon an unfamiliar perfume lingering on one of Hamisi's shirts. It was a scent she didn't recognize, a sharp, floral fragrance that didn't belong to her. She felt a pang of doubt but quickly reasoned it away, thinking it was probably from his office or a crowded city train. She told herself not to jump to conclusions. But the feeling gnawed at her, like a quiet whisper warning her that something was wrong. Despite the mounting signs, Nola held on to her faith in Hamisi. They were in this together, she reminded herself. She had left everything behind for him, the life she knew, her family, and the comfort of her village. He was her husband, the man who had promised to be her partner and her protector. But as days turned into weeks, and Hamisi's detachment only grew, Nola could not shake the feeling that the foundation of her world was beginning to crack. What could be causing Hamisi's distance? And why was the man she thought she knew so well now like a stranger in her own home? The tension between Nola and Hamisi grew more palpable with each passing day. What started as subtle shifts, distant glances, muted conversations, and rushed departures soon transformed into an undeniable rift. Nola noticed how Hamisi, once warm and attentive, now seemed to disappear into himself, his eyes often fixed on his phone or distant in thought. He no longer looked at her with the same admiration, and his once frequent affirmations of love grew rare and hollow. One evening, Nola prepared his favorite meal, a traditional stew from their hometown, hoping the familiar flavors would rekindle a moment of connection. She set the table with care, lighting a candle and smoothing out the tablecloth. But when Hamisi finally walked in, his expression was detached, as if he were barely aware of his surroundings. As they sat down, he picked at his food absent-mindedly, responding to her questions with one-word answers, his eyes shifting restlessly. The distance between them felt as vast as the city outside their window, and her heart sank with the weight of unspoken words. That night, as Hamisi fell into a restless sleep, Nola lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She recalled the early days of their relationship, the way he had once been her anchor in every storm. She had left so much behind to build a life with him, believing that together they could overcome anything. But now, in the silence of the night, she could no longer ignore the aching void in her heart. The next morning, Nola gathered her courage and decided to ask Hamisi directly. Over breakfast, she tried to keep her voice steady, asking if everything was okay at work or if something was troubling him. Hamisi barely looked up from his phone, muttering about long hours and pressure from his boss. His words were curt, almost rehearsed, as if he were trying to end the conversation as quickly as possible. When she pressed him further, a flash of irritation crossed his face, and he snapped, "Not everything is about you, Nola. I'm busy. Why can't you understand that?" His reaction stunned her, the coldness in his tone cutting deeper than she expected. Nola withdrew, feeling a lump form in her throat, but she tried to brush it off, blaming herself for being too demanding. Maybe he really was just overwhelmed. But as days passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker lurked behind his anger. One afternoon, as she was running errands, Nola stopped by a small cafe to buy coffee, hoping it might brighten his mood when he came home. While she waited in line, she noticed two women from her apartment building, seated nearby and whispering with intense expressions. They glanced at her and quickly averted their eyes, but she could hear snippets of their conversation. "Poor girl, she doesn't even know," and "out all night with that woman." Nola's pulse quickened. Were they talking about Hamisi? About her? She felt a rush of embarrassment mixed with fear but forced herself to dismiss it, telling herself she was overthinking. Yet, a creeping doubt settled in her mind. Who was that woman? And why did her neighbors seem to know something that she didn't? Later that evening, Hamisi came home, his shirt rumpled and a faint trace of perfume lingering around him, a floral scent, distinct and unfamiliar. Nola felt her stomach tighten. She wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation, but as he walked past her without so much as a greeting, her courage faltered. She watched as he disappeared into their bedroom, shutting the door behind him. That night, while he slept, Nola lay beside him in silence, her mind racing with unanswered questions. She felt trapped between her love for him and the creeping fear that he was slipping away. Memories of their laughter, their promises, and shared dreams filled her thoughts, clashing painfully with the coldness she now felt between them. She was losing him, and she didn't even know why. Who was the woman her neighbors whispered about? And why was Hamisi growing so distant? The answers eluded her, but Nola knew she couldn't ignore the signs any longer. The next morning, Nola felt like a shadow of herself. Her heart weighed heavy with doubt, and her mind was clouded by the image of Hamisi's distant eyes and the lingering scent of perfume. She tried to go about her day as usual, but the thought of that woman haunted her. She replayed her neighbor's words over and over, searching for a clue, some hint that might ease her growing fears. Determined to understand what was happening, she decided to reach out to someone who might know more, Hamisi's sister, Aiching. She hoped Aiching, always kind-hearted and supportive, could help shed light on the changes she saw in her husband. That afternoon, Nola called her, masking her anxiety as best as she could. When Aiching answered, her voice was warm, but Nola sensed a slight hesitation when she brought up Hamisi. She hesitated, uncertain of how much she should reveal, but finally, she blurted out, "Has Hamisi mentioned anything to you? He's been different lately, distant. I don't know if it's just work stress or something else." Aiching was silent for a moment, her tone carefully measured when she replied, "He hasn't said much to me. But, Nola, don't overthink it. Sometimes men just need their space, especially when they're dealing with work pressures." But her words felt hollow, and Nola sensed there was more Aiching wasn't saying. "Aiching," Nola pressed gently, "if you know something, please, tell me. I feel like he's slipping away." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Nola's heart raced as she waited. Finally, Aiching sighed. "I don't know everything, but I have heard things here and there. I don't want to make you worry if it's nothing, but I think there might be someone else involved. I don't have proof, but people are talking. A wave of cold shock washed over Nola, and she could barely hold the phone. Someone else, she whispered, her voice trembling. She felt as if the ground beneath her was falling away, her worst fears suddenly more real than ever. Yes, Aching said softly. But maybe it's just gossip. You know how people are. I don't want you to worry over something that might not even be true. Nola thanked Aching and hung up, but the words echoed in her mind, refusing to let go. Maybe it's just gossip. But her heart told her otherwise. Hamisi's cold behavior, the whispered conversations, and the scent of another woman's perfume, all of it painted a dark picture she couldn't ignore. That evening, she decided to confront him directly, determined to get to the bottom of things. When he came home, she waited until he'd settled, her hands shaking as she prepared herself for what she was about to say. She took a deep breath, then spoke, her voice steady. Hamisi, I need to ask you something. He looked up, his expression guarded. What is it? She forced herself to meet his eyes. Is there someone else? People have been talking, and I need to know the truth. Her voice broke slightly, and she could feel her heart racing. For a moment, a flicker of surprise crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with irritation. People talk too much, he muttered, avoiding her gaze. You're letting these rumors get to your head, Nola. There's no one else. Just because I'm busy doesn't mean I'm seeing someone. But his words felt empty, rehearsed. She studied his face, hoping to find some hint of sincerity, some reassurance. Instead, she saw anger, a sharp flash of frustration directed at her for even asking. The man she thought she knew so well felt like a stranger, someone who seemed offended by her pain rather than moved by it. Why don't you trust me? He snapped, his voice rising. Isn't my word enough for you? I'm working hard to provide for us, and all you do is question me. Nola recoiled, stunned by his outburst. She felt a pang of guilt but couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he was hiding something. His defensiveness only deepened her suspicions, but she held back, not wanting to escalate things further. She managed to nod, whispering a quiet apology, though it left her feeling hollow inside. That night, Nola lay in bed beside Hamisi, feeling a cold distance between them that no apology could bridge. Her mind reeled, her heart pounding with worry and sorrow. She wanted so desperately to believe him, to feel secure in their love again, but every instinct told her there was more he wasn't saying. Had she become a stranger in her own marriage, or was she merely imagining things? The truth seemed elusive, hidden beneath layers of his evasions and her fears. But one thing was certain, the marriage she once believed was unbreakable was beginning to crumble. The following days passed in a haze of uncertainty and heartbreak for Nola. Each time Hamisi left for work, she felt a growing emptiness, a sense that he was slipping further away with each step he took out the door. Their conversations grew shorter and colder, as if he were deliberately shutting her out. She tried to keep herself busy, but the gnawing feeling of betrayal lingered, casting a shadow over everything she did. One afternoon, as she walked through the bustling market, Nola spotted a familiar face. Mwakali, an old friend from their village who had also moved to the city. They hadn't seen each other in a while, and Mwakali greeted her with a warm hug. But as they exchanged pleasantries, Nola noticed a flicker of concern in Mwakali's eyes. Nola, are you okay? Mwakali asked gently, sensing her friend's unease. You look tired. At first, Nola hesitated. She had always been private about her troubles, especially those involving Hamisi. But something inside her broke, and before she knew it, the words spilled out. She told Mwakali everything, the late nights, the distance, and the unsettling rumors about another woman. Mwakali listened intently, her expression shifting from empathy to worry. Nola, I don't want to alarm you, Mwakali said carefully, but I've seen him around. A few times, in fact. He wasn't alone. Nola's heart skipped a beat. She clutched her bag tightly, feeling a surge of dread. Where did you see him? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mwakali hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure no one else was listening. Once in the evening, near that new restaurant on Pwani Street. He was with a woman. I didn't want to assume anything, so I didn't mention it, but he seemed quite close to her. The revelation hit Nola like a punch to the gut. She tried to maintain her composure, nodding as Mwakali patted her arm in sympathy. They talked a little longer before parting ways, but the warmth of the reunion was overshadowed by a cold sense of betrayal that settled heavily in Nola's chest. When she returned home, Nola could barely hold back her tears. Her hands shook as she prepared dinner, her mind racing with questions. Was it true? Had Hamisi really been with another woman all this time, hiding behind his claims of work stress and long hours? She felt trapped in her own thoughts, her once stable life now unraveling before her eyes. That evening, when Hamisi came home, he barely acknowledged her. His eyes were tired, his face impassive, as though he were weighed down by something he couldn't or wouldn't share. Nola watched him silently, feeling the distance between them growing. Finally, unable to contain herself any longer, she confronted him once more. "Hamisi, I need to know the truth," she said, her voice wavering. "I spoke to Mwakali today. She saw you, with someone else. Please, just tell me what's going on. I can't keep living like this." Hamisi's face darkened, and he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Nola, you're imagining things. Mwakali probably just saw me with a colleague. You need to stop listening to these rumors," he said, his tone sharp and dismissive. But his denial felt thin, like a flimsy wall barely holding back a flood of lies. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of honesty, but all she saw was frustration and impatience. It was as if he wanted her to stop asking questions, to simply accept his vague reassurances and go back to being the trusting wife he had once known. Nola's heart sank, but she forced herself to remain composed. She needed clarity, but she realized she might not get it from him. So, instead of pressing further, she simply nodded, her voice soft. "If there's something you're not telling me, Hamisi, please, just know that I would rather hear the truth than be left wondering." Hamisi didn't respond. He simply turned away, retreating into the bedroom without another word, leaving her standing alone in the silence. The ache in her chest deepened, and she knew, with a heavy certainty, that her marriage was slipping beyond her grasp. As she sat in the darkened room, Nola couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was lurking just out of reach, veiled by Hamisi's evasions and the whispers of those around her. How long could she continue living in this uncertainty, or was it time to face the reality she feared most? Nola spent the next few days in a fog of doubt and heartbreak, replaying every interaction she had with Hamisi, searching for clues, desperate for answers. Each time he walked out the door, a part of her hoped he would return with the truth, that he would finally open up and tell her what was really happening. But each time, she was met with the same cold, unfeeling version of the man she once loved. Her thoughts grew darker as she pondered her future, haunted by the idea of life without him. She had sacrificed so much to be by his side, left her family, her village, her entire world to build a life together in the city. The weight of her loneliness was crushing, and for the first time, she felt like a stranger in her own home, trapped in a cycle of doubt and suspicion. She knew she couldn't keep living like this, clinging to the hope that he might return to the man he once was. One evening, after another long, silent day, Hamisi arrived home unusually late. Nola was waiting, a resolve in her heart that hadn't been there before. She had made up her mind. Tonight, she would confront him and demand the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As he walked through the door, she stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Hamisi, I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice steady but filled with pain. "I need to know the truth. I deserve that much." Hamisi sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping as he dropped his bag. "Not this again, Nola," he muttered, not even looking at her. "I've told you, there's nothing to worry about." But she wasn't going to be dismissed this time. "Then why do I feel like I'm losing you? Why are you always avoiding me? Why does it feel like I'm living with a stranger?" She stepped closer, her voice rising with desperation. "If you don't want me anymore, if there's someone else, just say it. Stop lying to me." Hamisi's eyes finally met hers, and in that moment, something shifted. The calm mask he had worn cracked, and a look of frustration, almost anger, crossed his face. "Fine," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "Maybe we're not working out, Nola. Maybe this isn't what I wanted after all. You want the truth. Maybe I don't want this life anymore. Maybe I don't want you anymore. The words hit her like a physical blow, each sentence cutting deeper than the last. Nola felt her knees go weak, her world crumbling around her as she absorbed the weight of his confession. The man she had sacrificed everything for, the man who had once promised her the world, was now telling her he didn't want her in his life. Hamisi's face remained expressionless as he continued, his tone unyielding. I can't keep living like this, feeling like I'm trapped. You deserve someone who can be there for you, and clearly, that isn't me. He glanced around the room, almost as if it were someone else's home, his expression cold and indifferent. It's best if we go our separate ways. A cold silence fell between them, broken only by Nola's quiet sobs. Her mind struggled to process what she was hearing, her heart shattered by his cruelty. She wanted to plead, to ask him to reconsider, but a part of her knew that the man standing before her was already gone. After a few moments, Hamisi straightened, his expression hardening as he reached for the door. I think you should leave, Nola. I'll give you some time to pack your things. It's better this way. Without another glance, he stepped outside, the sound of the door closing behind him reverberating through the empty room. Nola sank to the floor, her chest heaving with sobs as she tried to comprehend the enormity of what had just happened. In a matter of minutes, her entire world had been torn apart, her dreams shattered by the man she had loved and trusted most. The home she had carefully built for them now felt like a cage, a cruel reminder of the life she would never have. As she sat alone in the dark, Nola realized she had been abandoned, left with nothing but the echoes of promises that had turned to dust. The love she thought was unbreakable had vanished, leaving her lost and utterly alone. The next morning, Nola awoke to an overwhelming emptiness, her body still numb from the shock of Hamisi's words. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hoping it was all a bad dream. But the cold, barren room around her confirmed the bitter truth. Hamisi had cast her out, leaving her with no choice but to pick up the pieces of a life she no longer recognized. Her belongings lay scattered around her, the few things she had left from the village. Clothes, some family photos, a small handmade ornament her mother had given her as a wedding gift, all now seemed out of place in a home where she was no longer wanted. Fighting back tears, Nola started packing, each item feeling like a small part of herself that she was forced to abandon. Hours passed, and by the time she finished packing, a hollow silence filled the apartment. She glanced around one last time, her eyes lingering on the memories she had shared with Hamisi in every corner of the room. She remembered the laughter, the shared dreams, and the promises they had made. But those moments felt distant now, ghosts of a love that no longer existed. As she left the apartment, she noticed a few neighbors watching her from their doorways, their expressions a mixture of pity and curiosity. The whispers that followed her felt like daggers, reminders that her pain was now a spectacle for others. She kept her head down, fighting the urge to cry as she made her way to the street. With nowhere to go, Nola sat on a bench, clutching her bag tightly as a cool breeze swept through the streets. The city that once felt alive with promise now felt cold and unwelcoming. She thought of her family back in the village, the warmth of her mother's embrace, the laughter of her siblings. But the thought of returning in disgrace, of facing their questions and pity, was almost too much to bear. As the hours dragged on, Nola's despair grew, the weight of her loneliness pressing down on her like a heavy shroud. She felt like a stranger in the city, her only companion the echoes of Hamisi's rejection. The love that once filled her life had vanished, leaving her adrift, alone in a world that seemed indifferent to her suffering. Night fell, and the streets emptied as people retreated into the warmth of their homes. Nola, with nowhere to go, found herself wandering aimlessly, her feet carrying her without purpose or direction. She passed brightly lit shops and bustling cafes, watching couples and families through the windows, each scene a painful reminder of the life she had lost. Finally, exhausted and with nowhere else to turn, she found shelter in a quiet alley. She leaned against the cold stone wall, clutching her bag as she fought to keep herself from breaking down. The reality of her situation settled over her, heavy and unyielding. She was homeless, abandoned by the one person she thought would stand by her no matter what. The darkness of the alley seemed to swallow her whole, a reflection of the emptiness inside her. Nola wrapped her arms around herself, trying to find comfort in the warmth of her own embrace. She had lost everything: her home, her love, her sense of belonging. All that remained were memories that haunted her, fragments of a past that now seemed like a distant, unreachable dream. As the city slept around her, Nola was left with nothing but the painful question that echoed in her mind: how had her life come to this? And was there any way to reclaim the sense of hope she had once held so close? The morning brought little comfort to Nola. After a restless night spent on the streets, her body ached, and her spirit felt crushed. She wandered aimlessly, each step heavier than the last, haunted by memories of a life that no longer existed. She barely noticed the crowds bustling around her or the piercing stares of passers-by who saw only a weary, broken woman with nowhere to go. As she wandered, Nola suddenly remembered an old friend, Fatuma, who had once told her, "If you ever need anything, even a place to stay, my door is always open." Though they hadn't spoken in a while, Nola felt a flicker of hope. Fatuma was a loyal friend who might be willing to help, even if Nola had to swallow her pride to ask. With a renewed sense of purpose, Nola found her way to Fatuma's small apartment on the other side of town. When Fatuma opened the door, her eyes filled with shock and concern at the sight of her friend's disheveled appearance. She ushered Nola inside without hesitation, wrapping her in a comforting hug that almost brought Nola to tears. "What happened, Nola? Why are you out here like this?" Fatuma asked, her voice filled with worry. Nola took a deep breath, struggling to find the words. She recounted everything: the cold distance from Hamisi, the rumors, and finally, his devastating confession and the way he had cast her out without a second thought. Fatuma listened intently, her expression darkening with each detail. When Nola finished, Fatuma's face held a mixture of sympathy and something else, something that looked like hesitation. She took a deep breath and said, "Nola, there's something you should know, something I've heard." Nola's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Fatuma leaned in, her tone low and serious. "I didn't want to bring it up before, but there have been rumors about Hamisi. People have seen him around with another woman, and not just once or twice. They say he's been spending time with her for months now." Nola's face paled, her hands trembling as she tried to absorb the words. "Who is she?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Fatuma hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Her name is Amani. She's known around here. I didn't want to believe it, but people talk, and Hamisi, he's been seen with her more than anyone else." Amani. The name struck Nola like a thunderbolt, piercing through the fragile hope she had held on to. She had heard of Amani, known for her charm and beauty, but also her reputation for being involved with married men, drawing them away from their families. Nola's mind raced, a tangled web of disbelief, betrayal, and anger consuming her thoughts. Fatuma placed a comforting hand on Nola's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Nola. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but you deserve to know the truth. He wasn't honest with you, and he took advantage of your trust." A storm of emotions surged within Nola: anger, humiliation, heartbreak, all merging into a painful realization. The man she had devoted herself to, the man she had left everything behind for, had been leading a double life, keeping her in the dark while he pursued someone else. She had been cast aside not because she had failed him, but because he had chosen to betray her. A spark of determination ignited within her. She had suffered too long in silence, her love and loyalty met with nothing but lies. She would no longer let Hamisi control her life or define her worth. She would confront him and demand answers, not as the heartbroken wife he had abandoned, but as a woman reclaiming her dignity. With Fatuma by her side, Nola felt a newfound strength growing within her, a resilience that surprised even her. She knew the path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time since Hamisi's betrayal, she felt a sense of purpose, a need to reclaim her story and fight for her own future. As she left Fatuma's home, Nola's mind was set. She would confront Hamisi, not to win him back, but to let him know that she would not be broken by his betrayal. The days of silence and suffering were over, and Nola was ready to face her truth, whatever it might bring. Determined to confront Hamisi and reclaim her dignity, Nola made her way to his office, where she knew he couldn't evade her. She walked through the city with a new resolve, each step fueled by the betrayal that had hollowed her heart. Though her hands shook and her thoughts raced, she held her head high, refusing to be the broken woman he had left behind. When she arrived, she waited in the lobby, ignoring the curious glances from Hamisi's colleagues. After what felt like an eternity, he appeared, looking surprised and slightly annoyed to see her standing there. Nola's heart pounded, but she steadied herself, meeting his gaze with fierce determination. "Nola, what are you doing here?" Hamisi asked, his tone sharp, as though her presence inconvenienced him. "I'm here because I deserve answers," she said, her voice steady but laced with hurt. "You ended our marriage, threw me out, and didn't even have the decency to tell me why. I found out from others about your affair with Amani, the woman you chose over me. I want to know, why? How could you betray everything we built?" Hamisi's face hardened, his expression a mix of guilt and irritation. "Nola, there's no point in dredging this up now. I moved on, and so should you. We were never going to work out. I thought you understood that." Nola's jaw tightened, the sting of his words like salt on an open wound. "You thought I understood? I was your wife, Hamisi. I left everything behind to build a life with you, and you never even gave me a chance. You made decisions about our marriage behind my back, without a single thought about the pain it would cause me." He sighed, dismissively crossing his arms. "Look, Nola, I don't owe you an explanation. People change. Feelings change. I didn't plan for this to happen, but it did. I can't help that I fell out of love." Nola felt her heart splinter even further. The man standing before her was cold, indifferent, so far removed from the husband she had once known. Yet, she refused to let him see the hurt that pulsed through her. She straightened, her voice growing stronger as she faced him with raw honesty. "You could have chosen honesty, Hamisi. You could have had the decency to end things before starting something new. Instead, you chose lies and deceit, and I trusted you through it all. But you won't break me. You think you can just move on and leave this mess behind, but I won't carry your shame for you. You're the one who betrayed our marriage, not me." For a brief moment, Hamisi's mask slipped, and she saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it quickly faded, replaced by his defensive stance. "Think whatever you want, Nola. I'm done with this conversation." With those words, he turned his back on her, walking away without a second glance, leaving her standing alone in the sterile lobby, her world unraveling yet again. As Nola walked out of the building, her steps felt heavier, her heart burdened by a profound sense of finality. She had come for answers, for closure, but she left with nothing but the knowledge that Hamisi had never truly valued their love, their life together. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but in that moment, she realized she had to let him go. Standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by the bustling city, Nola felt the full weight of her despair. Her heart ached with the finality of their broken marriage, the betrayal that had torn her apart. She let the sorrow wash over her, the tears streaming down her face as she finally allowed herself to grieve for the life she had lost. But amid the sorrow, a tiny spark of resilience flickered within her. She had been cast aside, humiliated, and abandoned, but she had survived. And though her heart was shattered, Nola knew that this moment marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a chapter she would write for herself. In the days following her confrontation with Hamisi, Nola struggled to rebuild the pieces of her broken heart. She moved from one friend's couch to another, grateful for the kindness extended to her but aware that she couldn't impose indefinitely. The weight of her grief was heavy, yet amid the loneliness, she sensed a tiny ember of resilience, flickering quietly, reminding her that she had survived the worst. One afternoon, as she sat alone in a small park, contemplating her next steps, an elderly woman named Hamisi approached her. She was a familiar face from the neighborhood who often sold handmade jewelry and woven baskets. Seeing Nola's tear-stained face, Hamisi settled beside her with a warm, knowing smile. "Child," she said softly, "I can see a storm has passed through your heart. But remember, even storms make room for new growth." Nola managed a weak smile, touched by the woman's kindness. She told her a little about what she had endured, the betrayal, the humiliation, the loss. Hamisi listened patiently, nodding in understanding. "When I was younger, I went through my own storm," Hamisi said after a long pause. I, too, was betrayed by someone I loved, left with nothing but a broken heart and a bag of my belongings. But in that loss, I found something more valuable, my own strength. I rebuilt my life one small step at a time, and in that journey, I discovered who I truly was." Nola listened, captivated by the woman's story. There was a quiet power in Mamakis's words, a promise that healing was possible, even when life felt beyond repair. She felt her heart begin to thaw, the possibility of a new beginning slowly taking root within her. Mamakisi reached into her basket, pulling out a delicate bracelet made of tiny, colorful beads. She handed it to Nola. "Take this, child. Each bead represents a step forward. Wear it as a reminder that you have the strength to rebuild." With tears in her eyes, Nola accepted the gift, feeling a surge of hope for the first time since Hamisi's betrayal. She realized that while she had lost much, she still had herself, and that was enough to start again. Buoyed by this newfound resolve, Nola began to focus on small steps. She applied for a few jobs around town, determined to find her own place and establish a life free from the shadows of her past. Her heart was still fragile, but with each passing day, she grew stronger, her purpose clearer. One day, she received a call from a small art studio looking for an assistant. It wasn't glamorous, but it was an opportunity, and it offered her a chance to start fresh. She accepted eagerly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she saw a glimmer of light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. As she walked home that evening, clutching the bracelet from Mamakisi, Nola felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer the woman defined by Hamisi's betrayal, but a woman on a path of self-discovery and healing, ready to reclaim her life on her own terms. Months passed, and with each day, Nola's life took on new colors. The pain of Hamisi's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She had found a small but cozy apartment and settled into her role at the art studio, where she discovered a new passion for creativity. Helping with the daily operations, organizing exhibitions, and assisting local artists allowed her to immerse herself in a world she had never known, a world that was her own, untainted by her past. Nola grew close to the artists and regular visitors at the studio, finding joy in simple conversations, in laughter shared over cups of tea. Her laughter, once buried beneath sorrow, was returning, and her heart began to heal in ways she hadn't imagined possible. She poured herself into her work, learning the craft of painting, and found solace in expressing her emotions on canvas. Each brushstroke, each burst of color, felt like a step toward reclaiming her soul. One day, the studio's owner, a gentle man named Chidi, noticed her artwork. "Nola, you have real talent," he said, admiration in his voice. "Why not display your work at our upcoming exhibition? I think people would connect with your story." The idea filled her with excitement and trepidation. Exposing her art and by extension, her pain and healing journey felt vulnerable, but she knew that sharing her story could help others facing similar heartbreak. So she agreed, working tirelessly on a series of paintings that expressed her journey through betrayal, despair, resilience, and ultimately, hope. On the night of the exhibition, Nola felt a blend of nerves and pride as people wandered through the studio, stopping to admire her work. Each piece carried a part of her story, a piece of the strength she had built from the ashes of her past. As she observed people connecting with her art, a deep sense of fulfillment blossomed within her. She was no longer defined by her pain, she was an artist, a woman with a purpose, shaping her life with her own hands. Toward the end of the evening, Mamakisi appeared, smiling proudly. She hugged Nola and whispered, "Look at you, child. You turned the storm into something beautiful." Tears welled in Nola's eyes as she embraced the woman who had been her guiding light. "Thank you, Mamakisi. I couldn't have done this without you." Mamakisi smiled, nodding knowingly. "Oh, but you could have, and you did. Remember, Nola, strength is something we carry within. It was always there. You just needed to find it." As the evening drew to a close, Nola stood before her artwork, a smile of quiet pride spreading across her face. She was no longer the abandoned wife, cast out and broken. She had created a new beginning, one built on courage, self-discovery, and the beauty of resilience. Nola's story is a testament to the power of rebuilding oneself, of finding purpose and strength in the darkest of times. She had emerged from her storm not as the woman she once was but as a stronger, wiser soul, ready to embrace a life of her own making. Nola's journey shows us that even in the darkest times, resilience and self-discovery can lead to a brighter future. What would you have done in her shoes? Would you confront the past or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if her story moved you, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more powerful stories of strength, healing, and redemption. Your support means a lot. Let's keep sharing stories that inspire and empower.